So I always say, relationships that never have any type of conflict, healthy conflict or anything, probably have a lot of secrets, right? There's probably a lot of deflection going on. People aren't being fully honest with who they are, what they need, because they don't want to have conflict.
Welcome to episode number 6 of the Life Unchained Show. My name is Chris and I'm your co-host along with the talented Danielle Laura, newly minted #1 international bestselling author 2 times in the last 30 days. Today's topic is all about masculine and feminine energy and conflict in relationships. We're going to be talking about what is conflict, how can we handle it, and then of course a strategy to help you thrive in your romantic relationships. Remember to subscribe if you love what you hear, leave a like to help the channel, and check out our sponsor, Life Unchained, your #1 source for success principles, life mastery strategies, and personal development. Check us out at yourlifeunchained.com. Without further, let's go ahead and get started.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Life Unchained Show. Last week, if you didn't catch the episode, we talked all about masculine and feminine energy, what it is. This week, we're talking about how it pertains in relationships and how conflict arises even within self and with others. And a huge part of that, I know, Chris, you were like an expert in all things laws of the universe, right? So I know, one of the laws of polarity is a big thing, right? That has a huge impact on relationships. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so a few years ago, I found that really a lot of things that we as human beings assume to be true really aren't true. They're just opinions. We're basically all experiencing the world, and we're just basically making massive assumptions. Most of us are even thinking super contextually. You see it happen with like statistics. You see it happen with all kinds of stuff. But I've happened upon this idea of the universal laws. Some of you all might know a really popular one, the law of attraction, obviously, is a big one.
Yep.
But there's quite a few laws. One of the laws that directly pertains to masculine and feminine energy is called the law of polarity. And law of polarity just basically states, sometimes you hear it called push-pull, you might hear light-dark, you might hear north-south. Really what you do is you consider everything on like a continuum. So there's no right or wrong, it's just a continuum. And in order for one to exist, the other has to be opposing to it. So in order for masculine to exist, you have to have feminine. And in order for feminine to exist, you have to have masculine. It's keeping it super simple. Now, what I found for me in kind of my experience is that when things are out of balance, nature wants to pull us towards balance. And that's where I think a lot of conflict comes from. So when we're talking about masculine and feminine energy in relationships, it would totally make sense that first and foremost, we would have conflict within ourselves, and we would also have conflict with others. And I know for you that you deal a lot, particularly with power couples and relationships, and that was a lot of your messaging. But how do you feel like conflict arises maybe from polarity?
Yeah, that's a great question. So anytime, like you said, when you have two opposing forces, it's going to create conflict, right? And we initially think of conflict as bad. Most people try to avoid conflict. Yeah. So it's like we subconsciously recognize conflict as a negative or unhealthy thing. In fact, particularly in relationships, whether this is relationship to self or a romantic partner or a friendship, really anyone, when we have conflict, it's actually a great thing, right? And there's a difference between healthy and unhealthy conflict, which we'll go into. But when the conflict arises, it means there's expansion happen because there's polarity, right? So it's two opposing people, right, who have totally different backgrounds, different ways of thinking, different life experiences coming to the table, and it's clashing, right? Because they're two totally different people. It's polarity. So when you have opposing, forces coming together and conflict arises, take it as a good sign because it means you're being what I call hot, honest, open, and transparent. It means both people are coming to the table, being honest, open, and transparent about what they believe and what they stand for, even if the other person doesn't, right? So I always say, relationships that never have any type of conflict, healthy conflict or anything, probably have a lot of secrets, right? There's probably a lot of deflection going on. People aren't being fully honest with who they are, what they need, because they don't want to have conflict. When you have healthy conflict, so let's talk about that. Let's talk about healthy versus unhealthy conflict. So healthy conflict is when two people are coming together, or even within yourself, right? You're coming together and you are being true to your core truths and values, morals, and beliefs, right? So you're coming to the table and you're saying, this is my stance, I believe this. The other person says, well, that's interesting, I believe this, right? Which could be very much the opposite. Now, if you can take that understanding and recognize you're just different people, you're coming to the table with different viewpoints, but still be able to, even if you don't agree with the other person's standpoint, be able to hear them, right? And hold that safe space for them without making them feel condemned or judged. That's healthy. That's beautiful. When you're able to see another person's perspective, even if you don't agree with it, right? But you're able to hold that space for them in their energy. And you're able to, even if you're an opposing force, even if you have polarity towards what they're saying, you can still be safe to hold space for what they believe, because it ultimately comes down to respect of that person's energy, right? Doesn't mean you have to agree with them, doesn't mean you have to change their beliefs or vice versa, but it means being able to see them and meet them where they're at and hold that space energetically for them.
Yeah.
Now, it turns unhealthy most times because we want to be right. It is natural human tendency.
I don't ever want to be right.
It is natural human tendency to want to be right, okay? So what happens is when we're in this polarity, our egos tend to come up. That inner psyche of ourselves that want to keep us safe and keep us protected rises up, and we tend to lash out, right? And it becomes unhealthy. So what this could look like is, yelling at somebody or cutting them off, right? Talking over them, telling them that they're wrong, being demonstrative because they have a different viewpoint than you do, right? Even things like sometimes it can escalate. People can get really passionate and they'll start cussing the other person out, or they'll start saying very hurtful things to intentionally hurt that other person because they don't agree, right? Because ultimately the core wound of that is they want to be right. Right, so that leads to unhealthy conflict, which I see most people have, simply because we're not necessarily taught how to deal with conflict in a healthy way, right? So that's where I see polarity happen the most in relationships. And I encourage healthy conflict. Again, going back to that, it's good. It means you're being honest, open, and transparent. It means you're being grounded in your truths and you are not afraid to articulate that. Yeah. Right? The balance of polarity comes in when you can keep it healthy conflict, not unhealthy conflict. Yeah. So instead of resorting to name calling or saying hurtful things that you'd always going to intentionally hurt that person, it's simply just holding the space. It's saying, okay, that's different. Interesting that you have that viewpoint. And then ask more questions. Well, why do you have that viewpoint? What makes you believe what you believe? How did you come to that conclusion, right? It's that healthy curiosity, even when you don't understand, that can ultimately lead to bridging the gap of that polarity and coming together, right? Yeah. And becoming to that middle of balance. And I think that's, really incredibly important. So in communication, of course, we have strengths and weaknesses. So Chris, what are some things that you've seen, in your line of work around this as well?
Well, I want to go back to a few things that you said, because I think one of the keys that we have, especially in this show, is to really keep things simple. There was a lot going on in there. There's a ton. And I think that if you're like me, when I started hearing about this stuff, like, it really paused me. It really made me think. So if you're thinking right now that it's completely blowing your mind about this idea of you should have conflict in a relationship, I want you to comment below and kind of let us know, because this is a space for you to be able to be open about what your thoughts and your beliefs are. In the Life Unchained community, we definitely encourage this quite a bit as a space for folks who see themselves leading others and really examining these things in an authentic way. Because I grew up thinking that conflict was an unhealthy thing no matter what. That conflict was something that just shouldn't happen, right?
Yeah, most of us do.
There was this idea as well, and again, vast majority of the world is Christian, right? And I want to talk about this really quick, because the polarity thing comes up for me personally when there began to be this thing where it's like there's this ideal that we're working towards. And I used to get, and I still get, really frustrated where you have an ideal of how you want to behave and how you want to operate in a relationship, but there's never a done, in my opinion. There's always a doing, So if you're in conflict, one of the things I used to struggle with was, especially in a heavy conflict where it was like you go to war, things happen. And especially when you don't have these skills or abilities or foresight, most times what I see it manifest is like after a conflict happened, I would feel really bad, because my intention was never to hurt anybody. My intention was not to cause harm, pain, or anything else. And then I would feel shameful, because then I would feel like, how did I operate this way? Because ultimately what I really wanted was this person to care about me.
Yeah.
And so oftentimes when you're talking about that core wounding behind, wanting to be right, I think there's also that concept that people want to be heard, felt, and understood.
Sure.
And more importantly, they want to be heard, felt, and understood for who they really are, not how they're coming across sometimes. And I think this ideal of wanting to be able to respond to all conflict with love is something that we continually are working on. I know I'm working on a lot, but how hard is it to respond in conflict with absolute kindness and love? I mean, that is a skill that is a lifelong learning thing, if anything, of, you know, conflict is caused, maybe even like physical conflict takes place. And how do you begin to handle that? I mean, that's a real thought to think about. But yeah, there's so much in there that's so good. And I think about it in terms of conflict. It's like fighting for your relationship versus, you know, trying to destroy your past. It's like,
right.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's kind of the beauty of healthy conflict, is being able to put our egos at the door and hold that space for the other person to say, you know what, I don't agree with you, I don't get it, but I do see you, I hear you, and I feel what you're saying.
and that doesn't mean you have to necessarily agree with the person either.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Like I said, you know, you don't have to agree. I don't necessarily agree with you, but I hear what you're saying. I feel what you're saying. I respect what you're saying, even if I don't have that same belief. And then it opens up this beautiful level of next level vulnerability and connection with that person, because that person is then free to be who they truly are without the condemnation, without the judgment.
So you might see people in relationships begin to change a little bit, because in the beginning, it's almost like most relationships, and we've all been there, we kind of morph into who we think the other person wants. And we kind of negotiate on things for ourselves that comes into conflict with our own polarity, right?
Yeah, and you know, we talk a lot about that in Life Unchained. You guys, if you're not familiar with that, definitely check it out. We have different modules around that. And a huge portion, what I talked about, I think in our last module, is that in relationships and Life Unchained.
Yeah. So I think communication-wise, this is a pretty hot topic, because again, polarity is talking about the masculine and the feminine. So this is just talking, again, if you guys haven't checked out the energy video, check it out. Because there are inherently natural things to the masculine energy and communication and the feminine. And, you know, I'm dealing with it right now. I have one of my best friends who actually went through a breakup about 6 months ago, and it was really a good way of kind of articulating how this how like the polarity happens, and how it can cause like some major confusion, and how it can cause a lot of pain in our lives too. But let's talk a little bit about strengths and weaknesses. So I think, you know, for the masculine especially, the masculine is going to be more rational and more externally focused. If it's evident in their reality, then we're going to see it. It's going to be true to us. Again, this doesn't mean this is just men. This could be masculine dominant women too. If we don't see it, if we can't hold it, that it's not true for us. And we want to understand more than the emotion behind the decision.
Right.
And I think sometimes in conflict, what ends up happening, especially for the masculine, is, and this is a strength, is being able to maybe see a pattern within the communication that allows them to step back unemotionally, and then be able to clinically diagnose like what's really happening, like what is this person really trying to say to me, and being able to ask questions that tell us more about what's motivating the behavior. And I think the masculine predominantly like wants to solve the problem right then and there, like stop everything and just get it done right then and there. The weakness, however, I found in the masculine energy is that oftentimes it can come across as if there's no connection to the emotion.
Right.
There's no validation of the emotion, right? In the masculine, it's like, I see the problem, we want to solve the problem, let's make it happen right now. And also sometimes the strength of the masculine, which is very much the protector, very much the external, like kind of physical energy, can also be a little bit dominating sometimes in that weakness.
And let's just point out too, we are not talking about gender. We are talking about the energy, masculine and feminine energy. So again, if you didn't see the last video, go watch that before this, so you'll understand a little bit better.
And so the other side of the weakness too is that the communication style of the masculine can also come across like it doesn't need anyone else.
Right.
Especially when you're in a position now, how this would look like for a masculine dominant woman. Maybe you see a single mom who's been raising her kids and maybe went through that divorce, or maybe, you know, obviously the father's not around, and so they're deeply protective of their children, and no matter what, you will not get to the core of me or who I am to make me vulnerable, because I have to be the warrior all the time for people around me. So those are some kind of ideas for the masculine. So the strengths are solving the problem, wanting to get to the core of the problem, maybe seeing a pattern, making it very cut and dry, which can kind of cut through the situation, remove all the excess, and maybe solve the problem right then and there. But the other side of it, the weakness is that it can come across as overpowering, can come across as not really being vulnerable, and not really connected to feelings, which will not validate somebody sometimes. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
The feminine does a very good job of relating. It is very much the relational aspect. It is creating that warm environment, and details are everything. It's like, give me more details. I want to know how you're feeling, how you're emoting to me as well. And so that's a powerful combination, because when you understand where somebody's emotions are coming from, you can now see the world from their frame of reference, and you can begin to connect really, really well. The other side of the feminine is very flowing, very creative. And so it's very much able to handle conversations that kind of free flow all over the place. And so, you know, those energies in men, sometimes the feminine dominant, are really good when they're also around groups of collaborators and groups of visionaries to be able to have those intuitive conversations. In groups of women in the feminine dominant relationship energy, you can be in that place where you also are getting along with one another really, really well, and you can create really strong bonds with one another. The weakness inherent in the feminine energy, though, can come across as being really self-conscious, really worried about being judged, and won't openly say certain things because they don't want to be judged, and they don't want to be misjudged or persecuted. And they're in the back of their mind always thinking about somebody's perception of them as well. They're always worried about like what could be seen as a problem. The other side of it too is it can be a little bit chaotic. You know, it can come across sometimes, especially in conflict, almost like just firing off rapidly at you because they're hurt, they're wounded, right? The men or women both. It very much is like the moment the other person's mouth opens up, it's like, and it can get really, really frustrating. So the masculine kind of wants to get to the point based on the surface level things. The feminine wants to understand the feeling behind it. Those two together can be exceptionally powerful, but however, you can also see how those two forces can also conflict really strongly if there's not an embodiment of both. Right? Did I miss anything in there?
That was pretty comprehensive.
Cool. And you know, there's certain, I found that a couple of things impact this. One is going to be environment. You know, understanding the environment that you're in sometimes can be a big thing of like, is this a conversation that we should have in public? Is this a conversation that we should have in front of people? Is this a private conversation or whatever? Environment can lead a lot to this. The other one is understanding your own energy. Again, we talked about this a ton. We talked about this in Life Unchained, but your energy plays a huge role without you understanding it, because it's the thing that might be causing conflict, by the way, that you don't even realize, because your energy shows up before you ever do. And one of the other things I see too is just the bias that we've been taught to understand as it's a female trait. This is a manly trait,
right? And
it's absolutely not true, because some men feel super self-conscious of being a relator and wanting to be that connected emotional person. And then the women can feel like they should be around the guys, and they should be able to maybe shoot the shit or talk about stuff that they really don't care about, but they feel like they should because it's part of the environment that they're in. We'll talk about that in strategies, but let's talk about the energy a little bit. You know, we talked a little about how your energy shows up before you do. And this, by the way, is one of the most valuable things that we can possibly talk about. It's a game changer, is understanding how your energy has an impact on others. Because knowing how somebody's energy influences you, this is something I'm like obsessed with influence, of how you can influence people without ever saying a word, or you can be magnetic to other people, or you can, you know, you can almost be a repellent for some people.
Absolutely.
You can be an energy drainer. You can be an energy vampire too. But let's talk a little about that. I know that's your zone of expertise too. And talk about energy.
Yeah, energetics is my jam.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm sure we've heard the phrase, your energy doesn't lie. Right? And
good
it's
vibes
true.
only.
Yeah, good vibes only. Your vibe attracts your tribe, whatever you want to say there, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of truth to it, right? Your energy doesn't lie. Your energy speaks before you ever say a word. Right. And so it's like, you've ever been in that situation where there's like that person that you just always want to be around, right? Probably because they have a really strong embodied energy, right? This person makes you feel warm. They make you feel accepted. Somebody you could talk to about anything. You know, you just feel loved essentially by this person, right? And then there are those people that you don't ever want to be around. You're like, if I even have to be in a room with this person, I'm just not going to go.
It's like Eeyore, right?
Right? Because they're either maybe very negative, or even just being around them. If you're an empath, especially, or a highly sensitive person, you're going to pick up on that energy. So you might be going in feeling great, and you're around this person who's, you know, super Debbie Downer in their own negative energy, right? It does nothing to do with what they say, but just being in their energy, you feel drained, right? And I know we've all been there. Like, you post the comments if you know what I'm talking about, right? And so it's so true. The whole premise of your energy doesn't lie. And as you know, we can pick up energy from other people, especially if we're empaths and you know that about yourself. You can be around certain people or be in certain situations and feel that energy immediately. So the cool thing to think about here, though, is we can't control what other people are doing with their energy. but we can control our own energy. And I think it goes back to self on this one, especially because it's, this whole this episode we're talking about relationships, but the relationship stems within self first. So we can't control how other people are going to react, right? But we can control our own energy.
Let's unpack that for just a second, because I know for us, like, we talk about this stuff all the time, and I don't know where you are in your journey, but you said two things that I want to, and I don't want to interrupt you, but I think it's super important. One, you said embodied.
Yeah.
That's not a word that we hear a lot. And the second thing, what you just said, is relationship to self, which gives us a really interesting thought, which is we are not our thoughts. So when you say embodied, can you give us like a quick, like, simple definition of what that means?
Yeah, embodied is essentially the act of being in the world what you say you are, what you believe.
So basically, you walk the talk. And
yeah, exactly.
Perfect.
Exactly.
And the second thing you just talked about was the relationship to self, which is super interesting, because I take that as, again, my masculine energy, the rational thing is, so you're telling me that I am not this. Is there something I'm missing? Is there something I'm missing?
I think the key thing to understand here is more of in relation to other people and versus self. We cannot control somebody else's energy, right? But we can control our own energy. So going back to earlier things that we talked about, when conflict arises, we can't control how the other person is going to react, but we can control our own energy in that situation. And I think the biggest thing, if everybody took more responsibility for their own energy, we wouldn't have all of the unhealthy conflict that we have, right? But when conflict does arise, we typically immediately go to the other person. Well, what is this person doing wrong? And this person is this, right? And it's very much accusatory and so forth. Versus in that moment when conflict does arise, what would it look like if we looked within first and said, how am I coming across in my energy right now? Am I embodied in my energy? And am I embodying what I believe, my core beliefs, truths, and values? Or am I lashing out because of some sort of, potential wounding within, or because I feel this other person's energy? Again, we can't control what the other person's going to react, but we can control how we react and how we show up within our own energy. So I encourage everyone to, anytime conflict does arise, right, immediately check yourself and look within first and say, how is my energy showing up right now? Is my energy showing up really so fierce to the point where I might be like potentially triggering someone else, right? Or am I showing up in love even when I'm frustrated, or I'm, this is a difficult situation, or I totally don't agree with this person? Is my energy still showing up in an embodied state, or am I just acting out of, passion that I want to just escape from?
Yeah, I mean, it could be, oftentimes I found that in the times of conflict for me personally, when I was upset, I wasn't even fighting that person. I was fighting a thought in my mind of somebody from my past and experience. I personally have the viewpoint too that there is such a thing as standing up for yourself and righteous indignation. We talked about this a while ago. But I think that there's a way to do it in a respectful way that represents who you are. And I think that sometimes people end up in these positions where they're making a judgment call of, am I losing an entire relationship just because of a conflict or a disagreement?
Right.
And I think that, let's dive in real quick to a couple maybe steps or some strategies that we can use as we wrap up, because we can go into this in a lot of ways. And again, Life Unchained, we go into this in detail and not only talk about this, but give you more strategies that you can put into place. Let's talk about a couple steps that you can use right now, and you can start to begin to identify maybe how you respond to conflict, maybe some strategies you can use to do exactly what we're talking about, which is understanding at a higher level how to respond better.
Yeah, so I would say, number one is check your energy, right? Tune into yourself. In any situation, knowing yourself and spending that time every day dedicated to yourself, even if it's 5 minutes a day, right? Where you're tuning into your energy, you're cleansing, you're protecting your energy, is incredibly important. That's what's going to set the stage to having more healthy conflict with other people, right? In a healthy way that leads to expansion and leads to growth. If you don't even know who you are and you're not giving to yourself, and you don't even know what your energy is, you're probably one that's going to fly off the handle to other people, right? You're going to be very easily triggered because you are not centered within yourself. So number one, I say, check yourself, check your own energy, develop a system that you can implement every day, even if it's 5 minutes a day, 20 minutes, an hour, however long you have, where you are focused on yourself and your energy, whether that's meditation, whether that's actual energy, whether that's just spending time in nature, whether that's decompressing, writing, whatever, allowing yourself to just be within yourself, right? And to process emotion that's going on. As you're doing this, you become more healthy as an individual in your own energy, which is going to show up when conflict arises. You're going to be able to maintain that embodiment of your energy when something comes up that you disagree with.
Oh. I think the second thing would definitely be doing an audit of the people you spend time with, and definitely taking a look at and ask yourself this question: who do I spend time with that really lights my energy up, and who do I spend time with that really drains my energy? There's gonna be times, unfortunately, especially if you have a full-time job, or you're doing other things, or you co-parent or something, where you just can't control that other person again, or your interactions. But having really strong boundaries is incredibly important. And it starts with understanding, maybe 3 or 4 non-negotiables that you have about the relationships that you have. And again, in the background of this is also doing the work to understand, are you feminine or more masculine dominant in your energy, and how you relate to others. Again, going back to, what is your basic mode? Do you like to get to the core of the problem right away, or do you want to get all the details before you solve the problem, and just do more relating, right? Not solving, just more relating and validating. So figure out where that goes to. Some people end up in a place where they get so drained, and I used to be the same way, where I was taking everybody's stuff in because I was the person that they would call, because I would love to help solve the problem. So I was kind of coaching before I was coaching for years, where it was like, oh, let me go into all this. And something as simple as, and I'll share this going back to one of my best friends this week in this breakup, this person is basically coming in and out of his life, and he's trying to, be the best man that he can on the surface, when really it's presenting unworthiness challenges that he's digging through right now. There's a 10-year age gap, and those are some formative years, especially in the age difference. But more importantly, the girl's mom is reaching out to him and saying, I really wish you guys were together, that you're an amazing person. Now, perceivably, obviously my really good friend doesn't want to be a jerk and doesn't want to be like, hey, like, me and your daughter aren't dating, then let's cut it off.
Yeah. But
more importantly, the mom is triggering emotions he has because the breakup is still raw to him because he was in love. And so what do you do in that situation? Really, one of the only things that you can do is distance yourself away from it. And distance is super important because it's not retreating. It's not a powerless thing to do. You're actually setting clear boundaries and able to step away from the situation. And it becomes even more powerful when you can do this with friends and family right now as you're going through this journey of transition. And it's not that you don't love them. My whole philosophy has always been, I can love you from distance, but love doesn't always mean that I have to be a doormat. That's super important for us to understand. So you said being aware of your energy and being aware and understanding in 5 to 10 minutes a day of getting clear on your energy. I talked about, your non-negotiables, your boundaries, and understanding how you communicate. And what would be the third thing that people could do?
I would say number 3 is understand and develop, what is your energy? What is your dominant energy, right? If go back to our previous episode, if you're trying to understand what masculine and feminine energy is, but know yourself inside and out is the biggest thing that I can tell you. If you know that you are a very masculine dominant type of person, right? Or a very feminine dominant type of person within your energy field, that's going to give you a huge eye-opening awakening to how you show up in relationships. And you can even look back, to your past and say, oh, I totally see why that potentially didn't work because I was in this, I was really in my masculine dominant energy, right? And then moving forward, what are the things, how do you want to show up, right? Who really are you within, and how does that play out in your relationships? And then just kind of do a little diagnostic and be intentional is what I say. Be really intentional with how you want to show up now that you know what your masculine energy is. What your dominant energy is, whether that's masculine or feminine, and how you show up in relationships. And then be intentional moving forward. Does that serve your relationships or is it hindering your relationships? And then make whatever changes accordingly to bridge that gap to where you can harness the power of both.
Yeah, those masculine and feminine energies, as you were saying that too, we go in and out of these, but we do have a dominant one, right?
Right,
so,
absolutely.
It's so interesting to take a look back at past relationships and see where maybe you allowed yourself to be more feminine dominant when really that's not your nature, and to see, did that relationship really work out for you? Sometimes, especially for men, they feel like maybe they were being more passive and more whatever. And then particularly in certain relationships where a woman has to show up in a masculine but doesn't really, that's not their dominant energy,
right?
That can lead to a lot of confusion and a lot of challenges in a relationship.
Yeah, take inventory, in what part of your relationships did you not show up as who you truly are, right? And what areas did you compromise or even settle and mesh into this person you're not really, right? Take inventory on that and literally like write it out. When you see it, like something happens in our brain, when we see it in front of us on paper, it makes it real, right? In our brains, we can go through, we can think about, oh, this might have happened, that might have happened. But when we see it in front of us, it makes it real. And then we're able to actually change because we see it in front of us. And we're able to make the appropriate changes to where we don't cycle through that pattern again, but instead we can make healthy choices for our future that actually aid our highest path.
Phenomenal. So I think that's a great place to end today.
Yeah.
Right. So we did a lot here, guys. Again, we're very thankful of you guys watching these episodes. If you guys do love what you heard, make sure you guys leave a like on the video. Yeah. Make sure you check out the other videos as well. We're making some big strides in the content production here for Life Unchained. If you guys have not yet checked it out, make sure you guys go to yourlifeunchained.com. Some massive changes as well going on as we begin to launch into our community for our aspiring world leaders, game changers, and visionaries. And we can't wait to see you learning how to live your life unchained. We'll see you guys next week.
See ya.
Bye.